This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight, my good friend Bruce Gagnon, returns. Bruce, welcome back to the show.
Good to see you.
Hey, always, my friend. God, so much is happening. It's happening so fast. But the top story that has got everybody's attention is the Israel attacks on Gaza, the genocide. The ICJ ruled overwhelmingly against Israel. People are saying, well, is it going to have any real concrete effect? I think it's had a heck of an effect on emboldening people around the world. But I want to talk to you about what is happening overall, and then we'll drill down a little bit on this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's over 115 or 16 days now. How do you see and how do you interpret, Bruce, what's going on?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is the damn near 30,000 Palestinians now dead, 60,000 or more wounded, massive hunger, malnutrition, spreading diseases that could take out the lives of 500,000 or more. Israel's blockages daily of humanitarian aid that is lined up just on the other side of the Philadelphia line, they call it, there in Rafah. They won't allow them in, only a few at a time, not enough to really help that much. Most of the hospitals destroyed now. And Israel's quote unquote good name that they prided themselves in having, right? They thought they could get away with anything, anywhere, anytime. Well, those days are gone. Israel's a global pariah now. And the really incredible, courageous South African intervention at the World Court there was, I think, a real game changer. And the ruling that came out from the judges, even though they didn't directly call for a ceasefire, basically they said Israel's got to allow the food in, the humanitarian aid in. The only way to do that is with a ceasefire. So I think Israel's in a real bind. And the United States now, fully complicit, the U.S., especially when it started attacking Yemen, now becomes fully complicit in these war crimes that are ongoing. And I think that it's starting to spread. We're just in the last couple of days, we've seen the Iraqi resistance group attacking a U.S. base inside of Syria. They say it's in Jordan, but it's really in Syria, where the U.S. has been stealing oil for several years now. Iraq has been asking us to leave their country repeatedly, which we refuse to do. So this thing is really getting hot. And of course, the right wingers in the United States, the warmongers, they're blaming everything on Iran because they're wanting to escalate the war into Iran. I don't know how in God's name they think they can do that. But how in the hell can they fight Iran when they couldn't even win in Afghanistan? They can't beat Russia and Ukraine. I mean, what makes them think they can take on Iran? These people are delusional. But anyway, I think that Israel is so afraid right now that they're losing their grip. They're losing control. They're losing that dream of theirs to have a greater Israel where they take over Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and expand Israel into all those places as a U.S. and Western colonial base controlling the entire region. Those days are gone. And they don't really have the ability to turn it off. They just know one thing: double down, dial it up, attack, 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 chaos, chaos, chaos. That's all they got. Anybody home?
Yeah. You froze up just a bit there right at the very end. Yeah, I want to comment on a couple of things. I can't agree with you more that I think Israel now, without a doubt, is considered a pariah in the rest of the world. Israel has nobody anymore that is on its side. Um, they have shown who and what they really are. They're murderous state. That's as far as I'll go with that. They're a murderous, cancerous state on the rest of the globe. Now, you mentioned the United States. You and I have talked about the United States proxy war in Ukraine. That's a load of crock. The United States has had boots on the ground in Ukraine since before 2014. The United States still has people on the ground. They're sharing real-time satellite intelligence with Ukraine. They've sent supposedly over $160 billion worth of money and equipment to Ukraine, which they can't account for. They don't know where it went. And Ukraine is one of the most corrupt, if not the most corrupt country in the entire planet. So the United States has been fully involved, fully behind what is going on in Ukraine, forced its vassals in Europe to participate. And Bruce, when we look at what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening now in the Middle East, the connection is clear. It's the United States of America that's behind all of it. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree with everything you said. I saw yesterday from a reputable Russian blogger saying that Zaluzhny, the general of the Ukrainian army, the leader of it, was either fired or quit. Did you hear anything about that?
Yeah, I did. Zelensky asked him to resign. He refused. Now, the entire narrative coming out of Ukraine is they're in a Twitter fight. They can't get their story straight. This has become public back in November when Zaluzhny and Zelensky disagreed. We're at odds. To me, this is extremely significant. This shows an enormous crack in the chain of command in Ukraine.
Yeah. I think it's an indication of growing internal turmoil there. Zelensky is so damn desperate right now. The fact that they shot down that Russian transport plane carrying prisoners of war, Ukrainian prisoners of war, for an exchange, it's something they've done repeatedly with Russia. But in this case, they shot it down. It shows how desperate they are to try to grab some headlines, to demonize Russia. To say that Russia would shoot down its own plane. Those planes are very expensive, those big transport planes. Why would Russia do that? Blow the chance to exchange and get some of their own POWs back from Ukraine. I mean, it makes no sense at all. It's kind of like blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline and then blaming that on Russia, saying they did it on purpose. I mean, it's ridiculous. So Ukraine is in a real tailspin. I saw yesterday that Zelensky was saying that he's got 1 million man army now, and he's ready take on, I mean, it's just, he told some European media outlet that. I mean, it's crazy. So I think their days are numbered, and it's collapsing fast. That money that the U.S. has been sending, we're paying for their Social Security of their retirees. We're paying for their bureaucracy, all the salaries in their country. I mean, do the American people know this? No, they don't.
No,
If
of
they
course.
did, they'd be furious. I mean, it's crazy. So anyway.
Well, what I wanted to point out, because you're exactly right on everything you said, everything that comes out of Ukraine or the United States is a lie. And all you have to do is flip everything they say 180 degrees, and you've got the truth. Now, I had asked you about the connection. The connection between Ukraine and Israel and Gaza is the United States of America. Let's talk a little bit more about this United States foreign policy, United States agenda for full spectrum dominance all over the planet. They are desperate now, not only in Ukraine, but are showing their desperation, I believe, in the Middle East by bombing the Houthis repeatedly in Yemen. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, that same litany that I just laid out a minute ago about Ukraine and how desperate they are and how dysfunctional they are and how they're falling apart at the seams, all that I think applies to the United States. Ukraine is the perfect metaphor for what is happening in the U.S. today. Literally, internal collapse, internal division. $34.5 billion, or $1 trillion rather, $1 trillion in debt. China selling off its bonds, its American bonds, like crazy, getting rid of buying the American debt up that they had been doing for a long time. Other countries, as BRICS Plus, it's called now, I guess, BRICS Plus, grows, more countries become part of BRICS, that alternative economic system to rival the IMF and the World Bank that won't exploit countries in the global south the way the IMF and the World Bank do. This is going to cause a stampede of countries pulling out of the dollar, the petrodollar. So on every single variable that you look at, the United States is losing. And the leadership in Washington is just so despicable, so corrupt, so incompetent, whether it's Republican or Democrat. I mean, either way, the two-party system is collapsing too. So anyway, I just think that our days are numbered. And, sometimes, you don't know when the fall is going to happen. But every now and then you get a bit of a sniff that it's going quicker than anyone might realize, because when you have so many variables underway here that I think the fall is going to happen quick. How can the U.S. afford, with all this debt we have, how can the U.S. afford this war now in the Middle East, this big war that it's creating, U.S. and Israel together? And Israel's economy is in big trouble because of all the effects and the impacts from this war with Gaza. So I just don't see how the U.S. can survive this period. Nothing good will come of it. Nothing good will come of Washington's misguided, misbegotten plans. So anyway.
All right, I want to stay on Israel. The Houthis have been attacking ships. And I don't think trying to sink them, just trying to get them to have to leave the Red Sea and the Suez Canal and take another 19 or 20 days to go around the Horn of Africa to get back to the Mediterranean to get to Israel. They're really trying to boycott Israel by not allowing ships intended for Israel to get there. Or if they get there, they got to go a long way. It's already been reported and documented that the Israeli economy is suffering badly. People around the world are now beginning to do their part, not just protesting in the streets by the millions when you look at the entire world, but boycotting Israeli products. The rest of the world is responding, I think, in the only way it can, is by boycotting Israel, by being emboldened by the judgment of the International Court, which I think a lot of people said, well, it's going to have no effect. It's had an enormous effect on people. The other thing that I think is so important is the Houthis, who were the first to do something concrete to affect what's going on in this war, to defend their brothers and sisters in Gaza. So the U.S. turns around and indiscriminately is bombing the hell out of them, but it hasn't had too much of an effect because they're still a formidable force. And now you look at Hezbollah with the attack on Tel Aviv, 14 or so missiles that struck Tel Aviv.
No, those came from Gaza. Those missiles came from Gaza.
They came from Gaza. Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yeah. But Hezbollah has been attacking Israeli troops and bases that are in northern Israel, right along the Lebanese border, and they've been doing that almost since the beginning. And they've forced the thousands of Israelis who were living in communities right up near the Lebanese border. They forced them out of that whole region, and now they're living in hotels in Tel Aviv, costing the Israeli government a lot of money. And those people saying they don't want to go back. It's not safe.
Yeah.
So, everything is in disarray there in Israel.
And reportedly millions of people living in Israel have fled to other countries. And so I think what this spells, really, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, is the end of an Israeli state. I've had a couple of people on the show who've been following this closely for years, and they do not believe that Israel will continue to survive as a state very much longer. I mean,
Israel's bringing in people from India now to help, like farm workers, to help in Israeli farms, because a lot of, as you said, a lot of Israeli people have left, but also a lot of Palestinians who were hired previously to do that work, but now they're no longer taking them. They sent several thousand of them back to Gaza at one point early on in this thing. So, Israel's in a mess. I agree. I think their days as a unified state are over. And I think they're going to collapse. And if they don't really, and forget the idea of a two-state solution, I think there has to be a one state in Palestine, and Israelis, Christians, Jews, Christians, Arabs living in the same state and having a democracy where the winning margin is based on population, and that means the Israelis would be on the losing side. And they don't want to give that power up, of course, but are they willing to go to nuclear war over it? That's the real fundamental question right now.
Yeah. What I think is happening, and I want to know if you agree with me, the Houthis have shown what the rest of the Muslim and Arab world should have been doing. Okay? They're afraid of the United States. They're afraid of Israel because Israel supposedly has a nuke. But I'm hoping that these other Arab states are being emboldened and are realizing that this thing is very close to spreading throughout that region. I mean, people around the world are commenting on this. Everybody's afraid, including in the United States, that this will totally engulf the entire Middle East, which is going to totally disrupt the world economy. Now, the elephant in the room, the trump card, is Iran. They're accusing Iran, America, and Israel of funding terrorists in the region. But do you think that Israel is dumb enough, desperate enough to attack Iran and bring Iran directly into this?
Yeah, I think they are. And I think if you listen to Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina and a bunch of other politicians in Washington and media talking heads in the United States on corporate TV, they're all jumping at the bit, wanting to attack Iran, which I think would be a colossal mistake, because Iran has the ability to literally bomb the living hell out of most cities in Israel, and of defending themselves. And also, Iran has the capability of taking out most U.S. bases in the entire region, along with its allies in various places. So, so far it's just been pinprick shots coming from the what they call the resistance axis, supporting Gaza, but Israel is yet to see the full fury of what is out there and what is available. But if Israel and the United States do attack Iran, I think they're both gonna wish they had never done so.
Yeah, you started talking about what's going on in the United States, $34 trillion debt, which will never be able to be repaid, ever, ever, ever. And when we look at what's happening in the United States, and I'm not there, I'm just reading reports from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the financial reports, and then reading what Europeans are saying. It looks to me, and I want your opinion on that because you're there and you know what's going on. It looks to me like the United States is being torn apart, shredded from within. We'll talk about a number of issues, and I want your opinion. This border crisis. I have a daughter that's living in Austin, Texas. And I sent her a couple of news clippings and I said, boy, what's going on? And she said, we're going to kick Washington's ass. Apparently the people, Austin is very liberal, but Texas is a Republican state. People support that governor, Governor Abbott. They realize what's been happening with those hundreds of thousands of people that have streamed across that border. They're concerned about these people being criminals, undocumented people. They don't know who they are. And we're seeing this fight, and now 25 other states, Bruce, are supporting Texas in this conflict with the United States Supreme Court and the United States government. How do you interpret what's going on? How do you see it going?
Well, everything that you just said is pretty much a good description of what's happening. Texas and a few other border countries have been putting people on buses and sending them to liberal states like Massachusetts and New York and other such, Chicago, and sending these refugees on these buses to those places. A lot of these cities have declared themselves sanctuary cities in sort of a virtue signaling kind of way, but Texas is sort of challenging them. Well, if you are so interested in being a sanctuary city, why don't you take some of the pressure off us in these border states down in the Southwest, and you take some of these people. And then when these bus loads start arriving out in places like Cape Cod, Massachusetts, which is a vacation spot for rich, wealthy, liberal Democrats, they started squawking and squeaking like crazy. And so you find out about the hypocrisy. Yeah, they're all in favor of refugees as long as they don't come into their wealthy, liberal communities. So Texas has really become very popular across the country because of these actions that they're taking. My own take on it is why I think both parties, frankly, generally support this open border. And what's the reason? Well, we saw during COVID that there were a lot of jobs that were going that weren't being filled, especially in corporations and things like that. And so I think they want to open the gates, flood the country with refugees in order to drive down wages. Because when there weren't so many workers, wages were going up during this COVID period. Workers were in a position of strength. They could demand wage increases. They could be very selective about where they wanted to work, who was going to pay me the most. And so the corporate world isn't very happy about that. And so by opening the floodgates and increasing the number of refugees who will, they're desperate. They're going to work for almost nothing off the books, no record of it, just under the table payoff. I think that's one of the reasons that's driving all of this insanity.
Yeah, and I'm going to put my conspiracy hat on. The same thing has been happening all across Europe, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Germany. Germany's been inundated. The UK, from east to west, they've had the same problem. And the conspiracy theorist in me is connecting what's happening all across Europe, the Western world, and now the United States. I believe there's an agenda behind this. I believe there's an agenda to crush and cripple the economies of these nations and render them back to medieval serfdom. I don't know how else to interpret that. It's not by accident. These governments all across Europe, the government in the United States and Canada are not capable or willing to even try to stop the flood of immigrants, which, by the way, are the direct result of the United States wars and conflicts around the world.
Absolutely. That's a key point. The people coming into the United States, they're coming from all over the world through the southern border. And most of them are coming from places who have been affected by U.S. wars or U.S. occupation and domination. El Salvador for years. That's going back to the 80s when the U.S. was supporting the killing of people by these fascist dictatorships in Guatemala and in El Salvador, stuff like that. So yeah, no doubt about it. So they create the wars, they create the refugee situations, they destabilize governments intentionally. And I call it neo-feudalism. They want to return to a feudal order, corporate feudalism, right? Where the corporates dominate. Countries don't matter anymore because of globalization. So in a way, you're getting rid of, sovereign power of a nation by destabilizing them. And then so the refugee situation and the constant wars helps put all that in motion. So I think you're right about that.
Yeah, you talk about the sovereignty. When I look at Europe, I look at it, these individual countries which saw this dream of the European Union, one family, one no passports, open borders, the same monetary system, the euro, this government unelected, they gave up their sovereignty. They are no longer sovereign countries, and they're beginning to realize it now because of the austerity that's being imposed, the suffering that's being imposed because of the stupid, destructive policies of the EU, Brussels, that have gone against the interest of all of these countries. Bruce, I see the same thing happening in the United States. I don't think the United States is a sovereign country anymore. I think it's been taken over. I think there's been a coup, and I don't mean an individual person coup. I mean the Constitution has been trampled upon. You talk about globalism. You look at the people in the White House. You go back as far as Kennedy, maybe further. These people are not elected, they're selected. You and I have talked about this for so many years. I don't believe that the United States is a sovereign country anymore. It's being controlled by powerful forces behind the curtains. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's true. They talk about democracy, of course, and they fight wars in the name of democracy, but they don't believe in democracy. These rich, wealthy people, these neocons, these corporatists, these globalists, call them whatever you want, but they don't believe in democracy. They believe in global capital control of the planet on behalf of very few wealthy people and banksters and military industrial complex people, profiteers, warmongers. That's what we're up against. And there's no doubt about it. And the good thing is people are figuring it out. They're talking about it. They're naming it. They're standing up to it. And that's it's a good development. At the same time, we see the Republican Party is splitting. I think a lot of people that are supporting Donald Trump, who I think is an idiot, I don't support at all, but a lot of people that support him feel that he's the only person that is standing up for them, people that have concerns about a lot of these issues we're talking about. Because they feel like that most Republican leadership is part of this uniparty, is part of this wedding of the corporations and government, wedding of the Republican and Democrats together. So, I think that, and Republican libertarians, for example, are a big bloc who are speaking out against the wars. Rand Paul, for example, speaks out against the wars, the war funding. Libertarians don't like foreign interventions. I don't agree with libertarians on domestic issues necessarily, but on U.S. intervention, they're quite good. So anyway, I think there's a lot of realignment going on in the United States right now, and it's a very interesting time ahead. What's most important, though, is that we stay on the street as often as possible. Just last Saturday, we had another one of our monthly demonstrations, this time in Farmington, Maine, which is in sort of west central rural part of the state. We had 50 people come from all over Maine to stand with signs at a busy intersection. And interesting that the truckers, these big trucks rolling through there, they were really honking the horns in support of us. So there's something going on in this country that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I want to talk more about what's going on in the country because I'm not there and I just read a little bit. I'm not going into it in much depth, quite frankly, because it angers me and I don't want to feel that way all the time. But The political divide. You mentioned Trump, and he's got an awful lot of supporters. Um, my own opinion, I think he won the last election. They rigged it. They stole the votes. They changed votes, whatever. There's been a concerted, systemic effort from the Democrats, from the government, the people with power to destroy Donald Trump. He's an incredible threat to them. So to me, this points out a couple of things. One, the tremendous discord that there is in the United States over what's going on domestically, politically. Most people see it, unfortunately, as Joe Biden, a Democrat. The hard and fast Democrats are going to stick with him, even though he doesn't know what day it is. He doesn't know how to get off the stage. I don't think he knows where the bathroom is. It's embarrassing. People here in Russia, they ask me, what is it with Joe Biden? Is he crazy? Dementia? Yeah, it's all of that. And they really think it's sad that this is what the United States has come to. Some of the people I talk to, when you talk about American politics, they like Trump. They seem to think that Trump is going to be the better one. So what I see from here is this tremendous political divide. I mean, there's divisions on many, many levels in the United States, but on this political level, connected with what's going on in Texas and 25 states saying we're fighting the U.S. government, to me, this is a non-shooting civil war. Bruce, do you think the United States can survive this turmoil?
No, I don't think so. I think we're going to collapse, and I think it's going to be a mess. Matt Taibbi, a well-known and respected reporter here in the United States, kind of on the progressive alternative side, just came out with an article this week where he reveals that the Democrats have been wargaming the next election. And they're coming up with all kinds of plans and strategies that if Trump was to win, how they can basically steal the election by doing X, Y, and Z. So this would, if this was to play out, would ensure basically civil war would be a result. In New Hampshire, the Democrats wouldn't allow New Hampshire to be the first primary. They wanted South Carolina to be the first primary because they knew that Biden might not win in New Hampshire, but that he could pull it off in South Carolina because he has people under control there. So New Hampshire then moved its primary back to an earlier date so they could still be the first. And the Democrats then said, well, we're not going to allow any, Biden's not going to be on the ballot in New Hampshire. So basically, we're just rejecting the primary there. So anyway, this indicates to me that the Democrats are definitely working towards a strategy in this coming election. They're flooding the party with super delegates, ensuring that unelected delegates to the national convention of the Democratic Party this summer will be totally under the control of the corporate money, AIPAC, military industrial complex, Wall Street, etc. And I also think that Biden is not going to run in the election. I think they're going to ditch him, but they're going to wait till the very end, near the end. They're going to ditch him, have him resign maybe because of some medical thing, put on a whole show about it. But Biden is going to be gone, and then they're going to bring in somebody like California Governor Gavin Newsom, very handsome, somewhat younger guy who's also under the control of these same interests. And so they're going to do a switcheroo. And so no matter what's happened in the primaries doesn't really have any impact at that point because there's going to be so many super delegates that these corporate interests control at the convention. And they will then appoint Gavin Newsom or somebody like him to be the candidate. And the Democrats will rejoice. Oh, good. We have a fresh face. Let's, here we go. So I think that's what's going to play out. It's going to be a real kind of tragic comedy in a way. But that's what the Democratic Party has become. I mean, I just saw a short video clip this morning, protesters out in front of the home of Nancy Pelosi, and she was telling them to go back to China. And then in recent days, Pelosi was on CNN where she was talking about people calling for a ceasefire are working for Vladimir Putin. So, this is a Democrat leader, right? Formerly supposedly progressive liberal woman, Speaker of the House and all this stuff. They're crazy. They're crazy. They're talking just nonsense and people are laughing at them in growing numbers. I mean, nobody really with any brains takes the Democratic Party seriously anymore.
You were talking about the Democrats probably are not going to put Biden on the ticket, and I have felt the same way. I think you'd have to be out of your mind to put this guy out there, especially if he has to go against Donald Trump. I'm sure he wouldn't debate him, but he doesn't have to. It's just Trump would just bludgeon him throughout all the way up to the election. And
Biden wouldn't be able to campaign, let alone debate.
The last time he couldn't campaign, he stayed in his basement in Delaware. Yeah. He wouldn't come out. Remember that?
Yeah.
I also thought that Obama would run again. He's the guy that's really behind all of this crap. I want to talk about Trump now, and not about what he's talking about. Only one thing. He's been out there bragging that, number one, if he'd have been president, there would have been no war in Ukraine. But number two, he can solve this problem in Ukraine by making a deal with Putin with 24 hours. I got to have your thoughts on it. It's making me laugh.
Well, I don't take anything that Trump says very seriously. I don't think he's a serious human being. I think he's an actor. I think I really believe that this whole thing is good cop, bad cop. Trump, it's a Hollywood production, scripted by Wall Street, Madison Avenue, Hollywood writers.
The CIA.
Yeah, Trump is an actor, and he's doing what he's told to do to divide the country. He's part of the game. Let's remember that when he was president, he was the one that put the troops into Syria to steal Syrian gas and oil, and which is criminal. It's criminal. It's illegal. Would Trump have pulled out of? Would he pull out of Ukraine tomorrow? Who knows? But is he going to pull the U.S. military back from encircling China? I doubt it, because the Republicans hate China, and a lot of Republicans say, "Oh, we don't need to fight Russia and Ukraine with Ukraine. We need to fight China." So I don't think Trump is going to go against that whole military encirclement of China. So I don't take anything Trump says as being very serious. Look what he did. He moved the U.S. Embassy into Jerusalem. increasing tensions there in Palestine when he was president. So he did a lot of very harmful things. I don't have any confidence that he would do anything really good. He's going to support the corporate interest ultimately. That's his job.
But, the thing that's scary is one of the arguments they're using in his favor. He didn't start any wars, but he was the one who pulled out the final nuclear arms treaty with Russia. He finished it. And this is...
And he dropped the mother of all bombs, they call it, the Moab, the mother of all bombs. He dropped it on Afghanistan when he was president.
Yeah. And here's the thing. And I want to get back to Ukraine now. Trump says he could make a deal with Putin. He and Putin, they got to know each other. Anybody who's willing to pay attention to what Vladimir Putin and Lavrov, their foreign statesperson, have been saying, including Medvedev, who's the former president, now a high-level deputy security man, they've all been saying we can't trust the West. Putin has admitted, I've been naive. I've been not served by the people around me to really understand what those liberal neocons were doing. He's made it clear. We're done with the West. We're moving east. The game is over. Lavrov, in the last few days at the United Nations, couldn't make it clearer. And so when Trump comes out and says he's going to make a deal, there is no deal. Russia is not willing to sit down at the table with anybody and talk about peace. I'm getting exhausted repeating this. Russia's 3 goals for going into Ukraine were: number 1, the demilitarization of Ukraine. What does that mean? That does not mean just making sure Ukraine doesn't have an army. It's getting all of the mercenaries, getting all of NATO, getting all of the money and the weapons out of Ukraine. That's what demilitarization means to the Russians. Number 2, to denazify. People in America and the West are not willing to admit that the government is now a Nazi regime. Not everybody in Ukraine has espoused that ideology, but to erase that from Ukraine is not a military goal. That's a political goal. It means a number of things. The Constitution has to be changed. It means what? Another 20, 30 years, 2 or 3 generations of education and brainwashing to cleanse that from Ukraine. Number 3, Russia is going to ensure that Ukraine is a neutral, friendly state. What that means is cleaning out all of the vermin in government, allowing a free and democratic election, guaranteeing that it'll be friendly and neutral, and changing the Constitution. There's no deal to be made here, Bruce. Your thoughts?
Well, I remember recently hearing Putin say that he was asked about Trump, do you support Trump, and won't Trump be better than Biden? And Putin and other people inside the Russian government have repeatedly answered that question by saying there will be no change if Trump is elected. U.S. policy will fundamentally not change. And I think that's absolutely true, because U.S. policy hasn't changed in my entire political career. I started working on politics full time in 1978. So I've seen the whole play out of domestic and foreign policy since that time. I study it daily since 1978, and nothing has really changed. It's only gotten worse. And it hasn't mattered what other countries around the world showed interest in working with the United States in a collaborative, honest way. Putin has been trying to do that since he came into office with the U.S., with the West. And look what he's got. He's been kicked in the teeth repeatedly, accused of things he never did, never said. So I don't think anything's going to change until the West collapses, and it is collapsing. And it's going to be ugly, and it's going to be brutal, but it's necessary because
I want to talk about how that collapse is going to happen. It's already happening, but the coup de grace is going to be the collapse of the dollar. You alluded to this earlier. BRICS, the BRICS Plus. Russia is going to host the BRICS this year, later in the year, and they're expecting another 14 or 20 or more countries to formally join. But what many of these countries are doing, and I read another report today, Russia, China, India, countries in Saudi Arabia, countries in Africa are all now abandoning the dollar. And this is accelerating. Abandoning of the dollar is going to result, and you mentioned earlier, China dumping American bonds, which have been really America's debt.
Yeah.
America's 34 trillion are held in bonds by countries like Russia, not so much more in Russia, but China and other countries around the world. This economic collapse is going to be if you can call it an event, and it's happening very quickly, it is going to be the downfall of the empire, of Western colonialism, Western hegemony.
Yeah.
And who knows what's going to come out of this, but these other countries know something, Bruce. And what they know is they are no longer willing to be under the boot of the United States.
And that's why today we see these wars going on in Ukraine, where U.S. and the West are trying to take down Russia, the encirclement of China, and now this effort to maintain the Greater Israel project in the Middle East to control oil distribution around the world, oil, natural gas, other resources. And they're all failing. But it's a desperate go by the West, by the colonial powers, 500 years of Western colonization, to hang on, and they're losing, and they know it. And at some point in time, they're going to run out of money where they can't already, we're already seeing how they're running out of, they've given Ukraine so much military hardware. Western Europe and the United States are running out of the gear. They're running out of stuff. They're running out of money. They can't keep doing it anymore. And when that happens, they got nothing left. It's their trump card is war and weapons and domination and chaos. When they can't do that anymore, they're done. And what we see is increasingly the global South standing up. South Africa going to the World Court. One example, the Houthis standing up, Hezbollah in Lebanon standing up, Gaza, people in Gaza standing up. I mean, it's spreading all over the world. And so I think it's a difficult period. It's a dangerous period, but it's the liberation happening right before our eyes.
Yeah, when you say it's a dangerous period, what's really bothering me is the gaslighting that the United States is doing, and Russia is doing it as well. The gaslighting, the fear-mongering about a nuclear confrontation. Russia just declared that Belarus now is a nuclear-armed country. Russia moved nuclear missiles there. The United States, we have to review our nuclear program, our nuclear policy. Russia has done the same thing. but only the United States has a first strike policy. Now,
in late January, U.S. and NATO are going to start a war game that's going to last till the end of May, and it's going to be right up against the Russian border, and they're going to be practicing a nuclear attack on Russia. So this is very provocative. But again, it's one of that Hail Mary pass, that desperation effort by the West to try to intimidate and paralyze Russia. But it's not going to work. But what it could do, it could trigger, by some mistake, by some provocative error on the part of the West, it could trigger nuclear war. And that Russia is basically preparing, like in Belarus, as you said, they're preparing to say, look, we don't want a nuclear war, but if you come at us with nuclear weapons, U.S. is now upgrading its nuclear weapons that are deployed throughout Europe. And Russia's saying that if you come at us, we're going to hit you back and you're going to suffer.
This is one of the things that's really bothered me, that we're being gaslighted. They're using fear now, but from what I have been able to learn, the United States is maybe 10 or 15 years behind Russia in its nuclear and missile technology. Russia has hypersonic missiles. They're loaded on submarines that are on the West Coast and the East Coast. The United States is not safe anymore as that island between two major oceans. And I think Russia has made it very clear with the tests that they've conducted to the United States, to the War Department, that, you know what? You're not going to win. And if you think that you can win with only a few people left standing, you're wrong. Nobody is going to win today if any kind of a nuclear confrontation takes place. And here's the thing, Bruce. You know it well. In my 2016 film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, when the Bureau of Atomic Scientists had doomsday at 3.5 minutes to midnight, I said it's more like 30 seconds. I now believe that it's more like the final countdown. We're going 10, 9, 8. And I don't know that there's some crazed Dr. Strangelove in Washington, D.C., or hiding away somewhere in London.
There is. Believe me, there is.
Well, that frightens me if there is, because I said in the movie, if these crazed people, whatever you want to call them, realizing they've lost this epic battle for control of the world, take us all down with them in a nuclear Armageddon.
I read a couple of years ago that the vast majority of the officer corps in the U.S. military come from the South, and they tend to be fundamentalist Christians who are eager for the final Armageddon, the return of Jesus Christ. And so I think we have pathologically insane leadership in Washington, in the Congress, and in the military. And this is the thing that I most worry about, is that in those desperate moments, in this middle of this collapse, that they will pull that trigger. I hope and I pray that it doesn't happen. But we, the people, can't just sit around waiting for these things to happen. We have to stay organized, active, out in the streets, and demanding things change. And when we do that, all over this country, and especially in Europe too, where they have many of the same problems with their leadership, I believe that the leadership of the US and most of Europe are basically Nazis. Operation Paperclip brought 1,500 Nazi leaders to the US after the end of World War II. They seeded the military-industrial complex with them. The CIA, all institutions in the U.S. were seeded with these Nazis. And I believe what we see happening today is a result of this seeding of the United States with these Nazis, with this agenda. And, we put in Germany, in West Germany, after the end of World War II, the U.S. installed one of Hitler's major Nazi intelligence guys in charge of the West German equivalent of the CIA at the end of World War II. So Germany's been under the control of the Nazis ever since the end of World War II. Things didn't really change there. The democracy in Germany was phony all these years. And same in many other European countries as well. So this is what we're up against. And the time is now for people to be out on the streets and revolt against these pathological leaders.